Welcome to the session, Digging the Digital, which is part of a seminar series called Filmrummet, presented by the Swedish Film Institute together with Nordisk Panorama. My name is Clara Grunning, and I'm a former film commissioner at the Swedish and Danish Film Institute. Since March this year, life has changed drastically in one way or another for most that we know. And it's been house quarantines, maybe loss of big projects, and worse, loss of friends and family, but also in milder ways. But the fact is that now, more than ever, it grows the importance of community, solidarity, and the documentations of the stories around and our lives. So, Digging the Digital today will, through our esteemed panel, discuss and explore the subject of what forced digitization has prompted, challenged, and discovered in this trying time. What platforms and new ways of meeting will remain? What are the biggest losses and challenges for films that have been released during this time? And how do we bring forward the best things that we've learned from working during the corona pandemic? We're obviously in the middle of this. We don't know how long this will last. So let's think about what we've learned the past few months through this panel. So I want to also, before I introduce the panel, just say that questions from the audience are welcomed, and you can email that to seminar@nordiskpanorama.com, and you can do that during the talk. And then I will try to bring up most of them at the end of the session, if there is any. So please send them in. We don't have a chat function on this session, just so you know. So, without further ado, I want to welcome my lovely panel, and I want to start with Charlotte Grym-Madsen from SVT. Why don't you give us a couple minutes of what you do and your background? Thanks.
Yes, hi, I'm a commissioning editor at SVT, the public service broadcaster here in Sweden. I'm based in Malmö. So I'm really feeling the absence of the Nordisk Panorama crowd this year. It's a bit lonely in Malmö, but it's nice to see everybody online. What I do mostly is here based in Malmö is I work with filmmakers from the southern part of Sweden, commission mostly Swedish content, but so 1 hour documentaries, sometimes we do a feature. And then I also commission for this year, at least, for an arts and culture slot that we have called K Special based in Stockholm. And I also commission some international programming along with my colleagues in Stockholm, Axel Arno and Lars Efström, you probably know. That's it.
Great. Thank you so much. And now we're moving to Berlin. We have Brigitte Auger from European Documentary Association and also Doc Leipzig.
Sorry, I turned myself off, but now I'm back on, and I'm busy making notes because I have 2 hats, and I also really miss traveling, where I do most of the nourishment and research for my first hat, which is that I'm the head of doc industry program at Doc Leipzig, which is the market that runs parallel to the oldest festival for animation and documentaries in the world. Every year we welcome 2,000 accredited guests to the city of Leipzig. And unfortunately this year we will also be meeting on Zoom and digitally rather than face-to-face. And so I really empathize with Charlotte when she says that Malmö feels empty, because when you do have the privilege of organizing events outside of a capital city, it's so nice to like welcome the world in like your smaller regional city. It's a really special experience. And then my second hat is since February of this year, we have founded a new association for the European documentary community. However, I would say we're more global in our perspective. We don't really mind what kind of passport you have or where you live, but we're interested in collecting all of the people who interact with European documentaries. So maybe your films are shown at European film festivals, or you're selling your films to European broadcasters or releasing them in cinemas, and maybe if you're lucky enough. And we felt the need for maybe a new kind of association that represents the needs of an upcoming generation of, or emerging generation of filmmakers and documentary people. And I guess I can talk more about that later.
Thank you so much. I want to leap over the water here from Malmö to Copenhagen. From Copenhagen Docks, we have Emma Mørup.
Yeah, hi, I'm Emma and I'm from Copenhagen Docks. Been here since 2016. So I'm fairly new, but I've been working here with our industry activities, mainly our international co-production and financing platform, CPH Forum. And I was, of course, part of the big digital shift of the festival activities that we did in March. And since then, I've been working on as a consultant or helper around other festivals and institutions across Europe with their online endeavors, from March and until now.
I can imagine you've been a quick expert in many situations. We will stay in Copenhagen. Signe Børge Sørensen.
Thanks, and hi everyone. My name is Signe Børge Sørensen. I'm from Final Cut for Real here in Copenhagen. We are a production company. We started a little more than 10 years ago. And before that, I've been a producer now for 20 years. We are 4 producers, Anne Kynge from Norway originally, but based now in France and in Sweden. And Monica Hellström and Heidi Elise Christensen and Maria Christensen. And we do mainly creative documentaries, a bit of fiction, and we've just had our first VR experience. And we have, this year we have Meanwhile on Earth we're involved in that one, and it's in Nordisk Panorama. And also we co-produce All That I Am, and we produced Songs of Repression. So they're all in Nordisk Panorama.
Thank you so much. It will be interesting. I would love to hear a little bit about your VR experience now during the pandemic and how that might have changed your strategies. Last but not least, we have David Hadis from Sweden, Momento Film.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting me, Clara. My name is David Hadis. I run a production company called Momento Film in Stockholm, together with my colleague Michael Krotkiewski and also Miriam Gellhorn. We produce mainly documentary, creative documentary, but also fiction, mainly for the big screen festivals and cinema, and then eventually onto the VOD and TV platforms. We tend to say that we actually produce directors rather than films in a way, because we always look for unique voices, and we talk more about how a film is being told and what is being told. So for me, that means like a good story is a very good start, but it's really a matter of how this is being developed into a film that makes the difference. And we work a lot with co-productions. I think all of our films are co-productions. Among our directors, we have Anna Ebon, who did Transnistria, Eloy Dominguez-Seren, who did Hamada, Teresa Traoré-Dahlberg, who did Wire Girls, for example. And on the fiction side, we are working currently with Daniela Espinosa and Isabella Eklöf, Frida Kempf, which I'm doing my 4th film with right now. We don't have anything at Nordisk Panorama this year, apart from being part of this panel and some other producer stuff. So we'll be back next year with new films.
That sounds good. And it will be really interesting to hear. I know all of you work very internationally, and that's also why I've called you here on this panel. But obviously, co-production and how you keep that kind of work up during these lockdown times will be really interesting to hear your reflections on. Which leads me to just say, again, the goal with this session is not to find any answers. I think it will be a long time before we can review and look back at this time and see how it affected us and the filmmaking and the way we communicate around it. But it is a short reflection on these past few months to see, again, what is it that we can save and put forward, discoveries that we've had during this time that will be important in order to continue, because it is hard to make film and it's hard to finance it and get the films out there, especially now. So I wanted to start with you, Signe, because you have worked so long and you produced so many really beautiful and successful films like The Act of Killing and Disembarking of Dogs and Strong Island. I want to ask you if you could share with us your perspectives on how Corona has affected your company and the films, that especially those in development. And you mentioned with VR, if you could talk a little bit about that. Please.
Yeah, it's different when talking about production and talking about distribution, but I'll try and do a bit of both. But we were, in a sense, we were really lucky in March when the whole country, when Denmark closed down, that we had just finished Songs of Repression. It's a Dutch-Danish co-production, so we were just the week before Copenhagen Docs, we were in Amsterdam and finishing color grade and sound and so on. And we had finished some other films earlier than that in the year. And then we had stuff in editing, and then we had 2 films shooting. And the 2 films shooting, one was in Ukraine, and that got postponed, but we have been able to start again, and it's Simon Lering-Villemont, and he has been there now twice, and it's going tomorrow again, and so on. So Monica, who's the producer of that film, has become an expert on how to get fast corona tests and how to get through the airport of Belarus and into Ukraine, and what kind of rules apply and so on. But it's been difficult, but it's been possible. And then we had another film with Jon Bang-Carlsen, and we had filmed most of it. We filmed the documentary part, but there's also some fiction part. And that's set in Arizona in the US. So that's much, much harder. We right now, we just have to postpone and hope that at some point we can open up again. But we've had all sorts of ideas about how to deal with this situation. But it is complicated. Then in terms of festival releases and distribution, we've had a pretty crazy year, because Songs of Repression came out in Copenhagen Docs, and that was an amazing experience, very much thanks to Emma and the whole team at Copenhagen Docs, that they made this possible in such a short time, and we all learned Zoom in no time, and we all sort of learned how to deal with being online. And that actually gave us a great push, and we had a very positive experience around Copenhagen Docs. But it's always difficult when you have a festival in your own country and you're all fighting for the press and so on. And because this film got good exposure and won the main prize and so on, it felt like it actually did get some exposure. But of course, it's complicated. It has been complicated afterwards, because even though the film has now been around at maybe 20 festivals, the directors are planning, but I don't know if it's still possible, but going to Zurich for the first sort of in-person experience very soon. But otherwise, everything has been digital. And that means the real meeting with the audiences hasn't really happened. And that's, of course, not very nice. And then we found distributing a film in these times is also complicated, because it's the buyers are not buying necessarily, and a film like this that's kind of dark and difficult is also maybe not the first thing they want to buy once they buy, and so on. So it's definitely not been an easy start. And then we had another film, which is an animated documentary called Flea, that got to Cannes. And it's, of course, wonderful to get to Cannes, except this year it was a label. And that's basically it. And now we're waiting for what other festival where we can launch it and so on. But that was a weird experience. We celebrated having a dinner with the team in Copenhagen, but it's not the same, right? And then you asked about VR, and we had a VR piece done by Vibeke Brühl and produced by Maria Christensen that went to Venice. And that we also didn't go to Venice, but Venice organized like hubs in different cities where you could come and try these things on with different headsets. And we've had to figure out something about clean boxes that can apparently clean these headsets very fast so people can use them and so on. But we ended up celebrating by doing a tour around the harbor of Copenhagen to sort of celebrate and feel a little bit like the canals in Venice. But it's getting a little crazy, this kind of, in substitute celebration kind of thing. And of course, it's a positive problem, but it is still a problem in the sense that the festivals are not always, they're always celebrations, but they're not only celebrations. They're also places where you are building on your contacts and meeting people and selling films and so on. And when all of this is not happening, the usual sort of great potential of a festival is not realized in the same way. And so, of course, we hope that this will not last for very long, because it is creating problems in many different ways.
Yeah, I can really understand this sort of fatigue also with, substituting both the celebration, but also just the experiences that you're used to getting, because it is, I think, it is, in my experience, crucial to get that direct feedback when you show a film. What is working for an audience and what is not, and that is somewhat lost. But just a quick question, because I'm really curious, and I want to also sort of have more practical maybe details and solutions. You said Monica, she has learned really how to process these tests and stuff quickly. Has she made is there sort of has she made a manual or something, or what are some tips that you would say what that can make that process really quick?
It's not a manual, but it's because things change all the time. But it's basically getting to know which websites you need to check in order to know what information you need to have, and then also finding out that in many places you can also buy a test if you need it to be, for example, valid for 48 hours. Then there are places where it costs money, but it means that you actually have it when you travel out, and it's still valid when you get there. Because if you have long travel times, as we have had sometimes for the team going to Ukraine, then the most problematic thing is if it's not valid when you get to their airport in the end, because then you have to start again, and then you delay, and the team has to hang around for a long time waiting to get in.
I think that's really good information to have, because even if that's of course something that you want to be concerned with when you go into filming, but there are so many details when you go abroad to film, especially now. So I think that's really good to know. So Emma, I wanted to come to you as representative of Copenhagen Docs. I'm really happy to have you here, because you have seen so much of what Signe was just talking about, releasing films at a festival, being digitized. Can you just talk a little bit about, from your perspective, behind the scenes, what from the 2 weeks out, when you knew that the festivals needed to be changed, what were the first things that you needed to do, and what do you think was the more successful discoveries that you did?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think even if it's been many months since March now, I still feel like we don't have all of the answers and all of the solutions, and we don't necessarily know what was the best thing or the right thing, but at least I can talk about the experiences that we had. And obviously we had only 2 weeks, some of the production teams, because the activities are spread out over the festival period. Some had even shorter time to get everything in place. So I think it was definitely a question of prioritizing with the amount of time we had. And also, so for our festival director and then the leading team to figure out what would we be able to do in the time that we had, and for the rest of us to find the right way to execute it. All the way down into very, very small details, which became clear. I think that dealing with online festivals, you are working at a technical detail level, which complicates things in certain ways, but also creates a lot of possibilities. But I think some of the biggest discoveries of positive experiences have been focused around sort of the way that the festival was sort of available and accessible in a different way than it usually is. And as you can read, or you may have read and seen in interviews with our festival director, Tine Fischer, and other people from the staff here, CPH Docs was certainly not just a festival for a Copenhagen audience, and it was available to the entire population. And I think, I mean, as a person coming from the countryside of Denmark, having grown up there, never having access to content like this, I think, and in a more broadly democratic sense, I think that's fantastic. And as has been talked about in interviews, etc., we've gotten feedback from the entire population of Denmark, and I think that's been very positive. And then also in terms of access and availability, normally we have events and we have a lot of great masterclasses and talks and panels around films, which will reach the people that go to a screening. And I think a good example that has also been discussed has been the Edward Snowden talk, which should have happened in Bremen Theater, that I think seats around 650 people or something like that. And now it's approaching 100,000 views on YouTube. So there are things like that. And then more concretely on the industry side, or the documentary industry side that I'm working more specifically with, I think we had a lot of, we were very uncertain about how this would play out, but we of course did everything that we could. And CPH Forum, our co-production and financing platform, where around 40 projects are pitched every year, took place mainly via Zoom. And we managed to carry out approximately 450 meetings over the course of the forum days. And in the end, it ended up being me sitting from, together with the team, of course, sitting from 9 in the morning until 9 in the evening on Zoom, to accommodate the meetings and people that were not in Copenhagen anymore, but were somewhere in Hong Kong, somewhere in West Coast America, and then with even more meetings happening in the coming days. But I think some of the experiences from this was that we were, of course, worried about or concerned about how this seemingly impersonal environment of an online Zoom meeting would play out. But I think we've been overwhelmingly positively surprised by how much warmth and personality and focus and also productivity you can actually bring into an online space, and that you actually felt the sense of community and the gathering, and I think a lot of people did experience very productive and focused encounters. And another thing was, of course, that the availability and the time stretches in another way, so that we could normally we have from certain companies, we'll have a few representatives coming. Now we could suddenly have more people present from Sundance and from Netflix and so on, so that we could be very targeted in the meetings that we set up between people. So I think a lot of good things can be said about that. And I think as soon as you are part of the online space, and as soon as you get into the Zoom room, as it was for us, I think a lot of good things happen. And I think a lot of the business can take place as it normally could. And maybe for some people even more effectively. I think the question then becomes about who gets to be in the room, and how do you actually enter the business parts of the festival if you are not directly involved, or if you are not selected officially by the festival. And I think that's really one of the challenges ahead. So for observers and emerging filmmakers, to create a space for them to engage with the industry and to do what Signe talks about, to do business and to build upon your contacts. I haven't seen, or at least I don't know, if there are any festivals around the world that have actively succeeded in creating that kind of space yet. And I think that says something about the importance of the physical meeting space and the informal,
I think it's so, I mean, it's really great to hear, because obviously Copenhagen Docs was basically the first big festival that we normally are in, that universe that we're in, that had to quickly transform in that way. So it's so great to hear all the different things that are sort of trickling in, that you're reflecting on now afterwards, and what you can do better. And also, obviously, it's something that is a big challenge, whether it's in a physical form or digitally, the follow-up between filmmakers and decision makers, and what business can we actually get out of these forums. And I think this, even though the pandemic is not something we wish for, it will still help honing our processes and ways of meeting in order to make this more effective. David, I wanted to come to you. You're also producer and not an owner of Memento, and you already mentioned some of the great films that you have produced, but we've heard about Copenhagen Docs, and I wanted maybe if you could share a little bit about a film that you're about to release very soon, that was selected for a festival that chose not to have a festival this year. Maybe a little bit about that, and what your strategies following that has been.
So of course, I mean, I'm not going to go in so much to details with the other things that we're doing, because I think I would only echo what Signe has been saying, that, you know, all the productions have been canceled. There's problems shooting in the US and problems shooting in all the different places. So we have spent a lot of time in development, which has been good. But going back to this project, because it was the first film that we were releasing this year, or supposed to release, it's a film about a Swedish rap artist called Yang Lean, and it was selected for Tribeca. So and we have Cinetic on board as a sales agent. So the strategy for the film was that we would have the festival premiere there. We will also bring, because he has a huge group of followers, fans in the US. We wanted to do a big thing there, basically around the festival premiere, create a buzz around the film, and we had a big publicist on board. So the strategy was really like make a big buzz there and then try to get it on board on one of the major VOD platforms. And then when we were celebrating the selection in Tribeca, a couple of weeks later, the festival was cancelled. So, and they were offering kind of different options in terms of spreading the film online and showing it online, etc. We didn't want to do that, because we wanted to keep the film until we could release it to the audience as well. And then there was also this discussions with the sales agent and with other producers, whether the VOD platforms now would buy more content because they had to stop their own productions, which really didn't happen. It was the opposite. So the film kind of died for several months, and it's not until, and then we felt that we have to rethink everything. Part of the festival strategy, because of the type of films that we're doing, which are not only intended for TV, it's that you have a good festival premiere and then you can build on that. So when that possibility disappeared, we kind of sat down and tried to restructure and rethink our strategy. So what we are doing now is that we found a distributor in Holland called Piece of Magic, and they're working with event releases. So basically what we will do is that we will release the film in Stockholm and then simultaneously all around the world, from Australia to the US. So we have a kind of a theatrical event release and then directly onto TVOD. And the TVOD is also, I mean, the good thing with having an artist like this is that he has followers from around the world. He's not huge in any country, but he has a big portion of followers all around the world. So what we will do then is that we will take control of this, that we will have the film on our platform, which is inmyhead.com. And then we will use his platforms, which is Spotify, YouTube, and all the social media, to direct the people to the film. So it's an interesting way of trying to see if we can, find another way of distributing film where we can take control in a different way. Then, of course, we have really good co-worker or collaborators in Nonstop and in Piece of Magic and Cinetic. So we are orchestrating this together with all of them. So I'll tell you more about it once we know how it goes.
Well, I think it's just really interesting, because obviously it feels like when you say, oh, we had to put the film on hold for a while, it's still in a very short window of time that you had to re-strategize. And it sounds like you're very much utilizing also this time where things are going more digital and trying to find these different new windows and platforms to release on. And it's prompting a lot of creativity around engagement of the content of the film, which sounds really really amazing and really interesting to look at. So I'm very much looking forward to see what happens with the film and the following. We're talking about films, so I was wondering if we could watch a short clip from the film. So please play the young Lee. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, because we haven't released the trailer yet, because that's something we will do it in the coming weeks. We want to release it to the fans before it comes before it's being released publicly. And so this is only a clip from the film, and it is a film that is not a biopic. It's really a film that you don't need to know this artist in order to watch this film. It's more a film about mental health, and also like the monster that the music industry is exploiting this young 16-year-old guy.
Thank you. Please play the clip, young Lean. Thanks.
Alla var fett oroliga, så här, kommer han göra musik någonsin igen, så kommer han någonsin kunna spela, så allt är över liksom.
You feel like you're with him, you've gone through like similar shit. It's more than music. It's a cause.
He saves my life. Every day I listen to him, it saves me. Like, literally.
Thank you. Thank you for showing that and sharing that. Good luck with the release of the film. I want to continue, Bridget, with you. You introduced yourself as wearing two hats, both for Doc Leipzig, but also for the Documentary Association, European Documentary Association. And I'm really interested in hearing a little bit about what kind of feedback you're getting as somebody who's gathering a lot of information and through your membership network. What are some of the biggest needs that you see that have popped up or come up during this trying time, and what things have sort of been discovered between networks and that sort of thing? If you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you probably noticed, or I don't know if the audience can see me or just like the speaker, but I've been like furiously making notes also, as we've been hearing from our colleagues on this panel, because sharing information, I think, has been one of the most crucial things that organizations like the Documentary Association of Europe can do, not only for its members, but just more generally for the wider documentary community. And certainly, like, it's just like there's not there's time for individual experimentation, but there's also no time for experimentation. So the more we can hear about things that are working or people who are taking risks in certain fields, it can really help other people minimize the time it needs for them to come to the same conclusions, for example. So the Documentary Association of Europe was launched in February at the Berlinale, which was also late this year. So our foundation date was the 22nd of February. And then I went to Australia on the 28th of February and came back on the 16th of March. And like, it's incredible that like Australia in general is like an isolated place, kind of. It's like far away and it doesn't have borders, internal borders. So it has like a completely different societal structure than Europe does. And also in March in Australia, it's it's the end of summer, the beginning of autumn. And in Europe, it's still winter and the beginning of spring. So in terms of, I tell this story in order to kind of express for me, the disconnection between, let's say, the seriousness of the situation of things that were happening in Europe versus what I was experiencing on a day-to-day level at the beginning of this crisis, and also in these first founding steps of this new association. And I started getting, and also the time zones are reversed. So it's the middle of the night when it's the middle of the day in Europe. And I started to get quite panicked messages and emails and WhatsApps and phone calls from people who really felt like they were in serious distress as the first festivals kind of began to pivot into something that we'd never seen or experienced before. And one of the first things that, people were kind of screaming in their messages was like, start a survey, start a study. And I thought like, well, actually, I don't think that that's the right approach, because to give people like a wall to project their kind of fears onto when they haven't actually experienced anything yet actually just promotes panic and general confusion. And so one of the things that we wanted to do with the association was reduce panic and reduce general confusion in the way that we could with our very small but kind of targeted network that we had already like started gathering. Also, we had planned as a network to share our message and our new services with people at film festivals and other physical events, which of course also had to then change the plan there too. So the first thing that we did was just start taking individual consultations, and those consultations were basically with people who had films in the Spring Festival circuit, and they were trying to decide whether or not it was a good idea to put films online or not, to try and find out like what kind of screening fees festivals were offering to those for those screenings, let's say, to find out which festivals were doing ticket revenue sharing, to share also that information with other festivals, to suggest to festival directors and programmers that perhaps it would be a good idea to have other parties from the revenue chain in the discussions about how they would structure their online screenings, so that maybe revenues wouldn't be cut out from later release kind of plans, this kind of thing. And through those consultations, we realized that not just with the physical lockdown, which created isolation for people, but where like the characteristic of the documentary industry is to be very generous. We're actually like we don't have a lot of resources, and certainly not a lot of financial resources at our disposal, but we have a certain sharing culture and mentality that requires interaction. So then we started planning these kind of Friday hangouts where people who just felt completely isolated from their communities could come and also exchange information about their experiences or connect with each other. And some groups were more formal with more kind of formal topics, and others, for me, I was like just completely mentally exhausted and like really uninspired about what I would do about Doc Leipzig. So mine was just like a coffee group on Friday afternoons where people could come for coffee. I was usually drinking alcohol, but it was certainly not a requirement. And we would do like kind of funny stuff as well, because I think one of the really interesting things that Sarah Calderon shared in a talk that was for IAVE was about her being a consultant for the Cannes Film Festival and for Marché du Film, and how they would translate into a digital space. And one of the things that she said was that these digital film festival platforms, or these digital theatrical release platforms, essentially are physical spaces that nobody has visited before. And so you have to create like a lot of landmarks and recognizable things so that people know how to interact with this digital space. And so sometimes, like also in the Friday Hangouts, someone who had like cracked the code about like how to buy tickets for a film festival, or how to access meetings, or, you know, hacks for the talk platform where the meetings for Cannes and then another festival afterwards were, like that people would share their experience and knowledge. And so it was like a mixture of like quite humorous and fun intergenerational dialogue, along with then other groups that had more serious subjects, like, you know, building the framework for a study for the experience of people who've participated in digital markets. So we can actually now, after 6 months, start collecting some data, and so that we'll have something to use next year for lobbying, or to help festivals prepare their new funding applications or whatever else. So for us, like, we've been doing it like a really, I would say, like low key, high impact stuff. And also what we've been trying to do is help film festivals, as Emma was mentioning, maybe create some programming for emerging filmmakers, or for people who just want to take a dive into the guest list, knowing that, you know, those spaces for coffees and for just meeting somebody on a rainy street in Leipzig or in Amsterdam has now disappeared. And so we're transferring our Friday Hangout models into like film festivals. And we did that for Cannes, and also a couple for Durban. And I did one also for Hot Docs. And it's just more about giving people the opportunity to present themselves, to invite the people who are in the hangout to come to like their work in progress presentation, or invite them to watch their film in their screening platform. And it's, I mean, like, I'm going to be totally honest, I'm an elder millennial. I was born in 1985, so technically I belong to like the internet generation, but like I would much, of course, prefer to be meeting face to face. And I find I try to be very optimistic about this, but I really wonder how sustainable this kind of interaction is, although parts of it are really great, like for climate change. And I think also that this, as Emma was also mentioning, these moments of radical inclusivity, I mean, that's something that's been really, really important to us at the network, because one of the things that we really wanted to do was make sure that we weren't reproducing old models, and that we were trying to find ways to be more inclusive and to include a really much more wider kind of cross-section of this so-called European documentary filmmakers network, and bring them together so that they can share and exchange. And then, of course, you get like Black Lives Matter, and you get these new social movements, and the world turns on its head again. So it's like, what an exciting time to be alive. I am filled with optimism, despite dislike of the Zoom conference call, or my mental exhaustion with it. But it's a really exciting time to be trying to prototype for the future, and to be taking proposals from voices that have been ignored willfully or unwillfully.
Yeah. I think you nailed it on the head there, and it sounds to me that just like in any other community, the film community is in great need of a dialogue, of an active dialogue, and feeling like you're not alone in these times. And also it prompts a lot of creativity and innovation, both in how to communicate, but also how to create content. Thank you so much. Charlotte, representative of Broadcaster, which is obviously an extremely crucial platform for documentaries. I wanted to ask you more on a practical level, sort of how has your everyday sort of work life changed during this time? And I'm also thinking specifically about when you're programming for a channel or for SVT. How does it work now when maybe films are delayed and co-productions are on hold and all these things? Could you share a little bit about your just the practicalities.
Absolutely. I mean, I think in terms of broadcast, documentary was affected a bit later. I know most of my colleagues who initially sort of, where things were really hectic here was like shows being cancelled, the news being really important and everything. And then what we were doing is like maybe not so terribly important within broadcast context. But I think we are definitely feeling now more and more so the effects of what's happening. And I think, as you were saying, in the way that we because we tend to be early on in the projects, in the financing stage, that's where we get in. But then at the end of the chain, that's also where when we broadcast things. So we are affected in different ways, I think. And obviously for us it's pretty much, I mean, as opposed to many others, maybe that then it's business as usual for us. We have the same slots to fill, have the same budgets, have the same mandate. So we need to go on in the same way, but it does affect us. End of the chain is how we fill the schedule. And obviously we have the advantage of having a huge back catalogue of great films that we can rerun. But we still have to be relevant. We still have to be also in broadcast context, someone that, I mean, everybody else who are higher levels of making decisions and distributing money in my organization seem so that we still seem relevant and we still produce new content. And we've been affected in the way that because we are at the end, then often films are delayed when they're waiting, when it's a longer festival distribution time period, when we have to wait for films to go into cinemas. And we have great understanding for this, and we try to be flexible and everything, but at the end of the day, we're still waiting for films to show to our audience as well. So we are being affected in that way. And we're also being affected at the other end in terms of how when we get into new content and how we can get into new content. And I think I'm not really sure whether that's just, whether it's also because we meet less people, but I kind of feel that we are not discovering so much new. I mean, maybe it's because people will come to us later. Maybe they develop projects further before they come to us. Maybe it's development of new projects being affected more. I'm not really sure so much. And I think it's also because in terms of how we work, we obviously do a lot of work in the office, but we also travel around and meet people, and we meet people not just in festivals and markets, but also locally. And that's also very much that's where things happen. Much. I was just looking back at many of the films that I've commissioned recently and gone into projects, and so many of these have started actually not just for someone. Obviously, some of them, yes, they submit to us in the standard way, but so many of them happen when you come across someone, and then an idea sparks, and then you start talking, and it grows from there. And I think that is what I'm missing very much. I mean, where you kind of feel, oh, I want to do that, or I see a film by a filmmaker who I haven't come across before, and that's why I get inspired. And people talk about projects, people talk about this person doing that, and you get invested in that. So I mean, that whole sort of beehive of things going on, and where things are born, and sort of, I know that you don't necessarily come to broadcasters with an idea and just like sit. That's not what we do, but for it to come from a level of idea to actually being somewhat a project that you need to realize, I think there's a gap there where I kind of feel that I'm missing out. So that's, I think, is the biggest. Does David want to say something? Okay.
Yeah. Why don't you finish your thought?
Yeah, I think that's, to me, that's the biggest challenge at the moment is like initializing new context and content and going into productions and see what's happening. And I kind of feel that maybe we're a bit removed from that now.
No, I can imagine also there is a certain fatigue around watching, even if it's accessible to many people, to see the pitches and see the projects and even the films digitally. Whereas when you were in a forum, maybe it's easier to see what are this year's trends and tendencies in subject and approach and so forth. I was just, I had one question before I let you in, David, which is just if you had any particular tips or wishes that people would do or filmmakers would do in order to sort of present their ideas could they come earlier, you think, or would it make sense?
I think, yeah, absolutely. I think it was, what I miss is ways of having conversations. And I think you can do that online, because we tend to now, we go onto online pitching forums and we book in meetings, or we book in meetings with filmmakers, and it's really efficient. You can book so many meetings in a day. You can go directly from one meeting to another. But there's also something missing there. And I think what I would love, and I should also maybe initialize that more, is invite people to have conversations where we also talk about the weather, but then we talk about ideas at a very early stage, and maybe also encourage filmmakers to come to us with ideas, and then we can, talk about ideas. That doesn't mean that we commit at that stage, doesn't mean that the ideas will necessarily become something, but something will come out of that. And also just to get a feeling of what people are thinking about, what's happening, what ideas are.
Yeah, it sounds like you should visit the Friday hangouts with Bridget and hear what people are talking about there. David, can you you had a question or a comment, I think, to Charlotte?
Yeah, no, more a general reflection. I think I agree with what you all have said, that there's, it sparkles a lot of creativity in terms of how we interact with each other. And I have been quite happy not traveling the way I've been normally do. So there are a lot of positive things that I think I will bring with me in the future in the way that I'm producing. But I think the biggest challenge is that we miss out on this in-between spaces. And it's a fragile process producing films. We're working with non-existing money, basically. So it's really about building relations. So, I would say all of my co-productions are with people that I really know, and I hang out, have dinner with, or have a beer with, or whatever. And this space is really, I don't think, it's very difficult to start new types of collaborations, and also in relationship to financiers and partners, without having that space. And I think that is really the big challenge when we are missing this physical in-between space. That is, not during the pitch or in the market, but what is happening in between there. That space is what I'm missing, really, I have to say.
Yeah, and I can really sympathize with that, because like you all have said, the energy that you have in the meetings when you talk about these very important subjects and films is really hard to recreate digitally. And I think that it gives a lot of food for thought on how to create, like you, Bridget, that have started one new platform or meeting, to start finding new ways, maybe smaller. It doesn't have to include everybody in the whole community, but maybe smaller, more specific, directed forums for people to discuss and meet, and not the same people that they meet normally and that they've collaborated with in general. So I think I had so many more questions, but you guys are really professional panelists, and you've covered so much in your single answers to this. And I just wanted to check if there was any of you that had a final comment that you wanted to push forward as something to think about. Yes, Bridget.
I do, which is that I think like this, I really want to come back to something that I took a note down and underlined multiple times, which is this substitute celebration that Signe said, because I would say that, like, not to also underestimate the quality of my work in other fields, and also the quality of the work that my colleagues have always contributed to, also building the industry program at Doc Leipzig. But I would really say that my number one skill that has like made me able to like build the market in Leipzig is my ability to throw a dinner party, like the ability to invite interesting people to be together, unburdened by pitching, and but unburdened of the need to talk about films, which is not to eliminate the conversation of like making films completely, but creating these downtime spaces is really important. And certainly if I put my other hat on as like my Doc Leipzig hat, and which also intersects with my day hat, it's really difficult for us to like take a leap of faith, let's say, because we also understand that people are very sick of being on video calls. And also, you know, if we're talking about radical inclusion, which is something that the internet should like offer us, you can't also then discount things like, you know, raising children and who's responsible for households and what people's internet connections are like and who has access to stable electricity and all of these things, which doesn't make the internet a fair place at all, in fact. But I really my wish, I guess, from filmmakers and from decision makers and from the spectrum of people who are interacting in the documentary space is that that if you are invited to one of these Zoom cocktails or Zoom hangouts or Zoom concerts or whatever, please come, because it's a leap of faith for us also to offer them, and we don't want to waste your time, but we do want to see if we can try and recreate some of these like more informal sessions for you. And if you do come, I beg of you, don't pitch your project. Pretend you are at a cocktail. Use the opportunity to find out how many cats, for example, Axel Arno has, which I know the answer to. But like, you know, really like I was talking with my staff at Doc Leipzig also about this today. Like, you know, we're asking you to take a leap of faith with us because we're all going on journeys that we've never been on before. And so just please come with us. It's like,
I think that is really great, great last words, to keep finding new ways of communicating and meeting and doing it in both in the context of trying to sell and distribute your project and finance it, but also to get to know each other and to find new relationships. So pushing that forward. And also keep developing new projects, presenting your projects, even if it feels like you're far away, maybe when you're not at festival physically. Sounds to me like those are the things to take with us forward. I want to thank you all so very much for being here today. And I want to thank the audience and Nordisk Panorama and Filmrummet. Thank you all. Have a great rest of the day. Thanks.